We are an aging society. We have a growing economy that needs a lot of new workers. The local labor market supply is not enough.
Welcome to the show. Vashi is away today. With the federal election less than 4 months away, CBC News is asking Canadians what issues matter most to them. A commission poll involving more than 4,000 people reveals some divisions, and one of the issues people are divided about involves newcomers to this country. The CBC's Salima Shivji is looking into what the numbers are telling us about Canadians' attitudes on immigration and refugees, and she joins me now. So what stood out for you?
Well, it's interesting, actually, Katie. Obviously, this was a sweeping poll, but on this issue, it really shows a clear divide in a way. Sort of the preference being for skilled workers to be coming into the country as opposed to refugees. So that's the most stark conclusion from this. Although, interestingly, 74% of those surveyed don't care about the ethnic makeup of those coming in. It's really about whether the skills are there or not. And let's look a little bit closer at the numbers. So less than half of those surveyed, actually only 43%, agree with the statement that Canada should be accepting more refugees. And interestingly, there's this worry over illegal immigration that's also present in this poll. 64% of those polled say it's becoming a serious problem. So sort of that idea that there's a need for a system that is orderly, that is fair. But I do want to point out a little bit of context as well. There was also a question asked of how important this issue is to those who were polled, if it's top of the election issues that they're going to be focusing on as they vote. And really, it was quite low down on that list. It came in about 8th, way below the cost of living, healthcare, and climate change. So just a bit of context for where this issue is at in terms of voters.
If those are the attitudes, do the facts about how Canada's immigration system actually works match those attitudes? And what has the political reaction been?
Yeah, it's interesting, actually, because a lot of the federal parties have already been talking about this issue. As you know, there's that sort of that sense of fairness, if the system is fair, has been really tapped into by the federal Conservatives. We saw Andrew Scheer talking about it in one of his 5 policy speeches. He talked about he being the one who could sort of fix Canada's immigration system and restore faith, that sort of idea that, cracking down on people who are gaming the system or trying to jump the queue. So those sort of statements have been coming from the federal Conservatives for a while now. The Conservatives have also promised, to forego set yearly immigration levels, whereas that's their contrast with the Liberals, because of course we know they want to keep those numbers going up. They want to still increase the number of immigrants coming in each year to up to 350,000 by 2021. Even though, honestly, internal polling that the party has done do show that Canadians are happy with where the limits are now without that added increase. So the immigration minister has spoken about this, really talking about the need for his party and just in general to highlight how we need skilled workers and we need to help in terms of our changing demographic. We need these workers to come in. We need to let these people in. But of course, the Liberals are also attuned to that idea that Canadians want that fair system. They want to make sure that the system is fair. The Prime Minister mentioned it as he was defending a thing that was slipped into the budget, that sort of slightly more aggressive stance in cracking down on some would-be refugee claimants making asylum claims in Canada that was pushed into law by the budget implementation bill. So you're getting that idea of fairness in the system echoed by the Liberals as well, and not just the federal Conservatives. Now, Quebec's premier ventured into the debate again today. Again, the focus was on skilled workers, and he says he wants to sort of push Ottawa to focus on economic immigration. Take a listen.
Right now, there's a lack of personnel in many companies in Canada. So I've already spoken with few premiers of other provinces, and I think we can have a common demand to the federal government to change the percentage and increase the percentage of economic immigration.
So there you go. That's Quebec's stance. Obviously, they have control over economic immigration as opposed to other provinces who do not, but he wants the other premiers on side. He is promising to bring this issue, put it on the agenda for that big premiers meeting next week in Saskatoon. So look out for that.
All right, Salima Shivji, thank you for your time today.
You're welcome.
So how is this information being interpreted by people who work with the refugee community? Janet Dench is the executive director of the Canadian Council for Refugees, and she joins me from Montreal. Thank you very much for your time today, Ms. Dench. I want to ask you, 57% of respondents said Canada should not be accepting more refugees. Are you surprised by that figure?
Well, it's certainly a little bit disheartening, but at the same time, you have to understand it depends a bit on the context in which the question is asked. And in experience, when you ask people in general, in the abstract, do you want more refugees, they may answer differently to if you present them with a particular person who needs our protection and is going to face severe persecution, even death potentially if they're sent back home. And most people in the latter case respond with compassion.
In the CBC story that we're running online right now, one frontline worker mentioned that she has seen a shift in attitudes towards refugees, and it's a shift to the more negative. Is that something you've had a sense of at all?
Yeah, there's a lot of concern among all of our member organizations about rising intolerant attitudes, and they have an enormous impact. They affect the policies that the government adopt, but they also affect the experiences of people on the ground. And we've seen this over the years as there's rising and falling levels of welcoming towards refugees and hostility towards newcomers more generally. So when things go down, it affects people's everyday lives. It affects their daily encounters, and it affects, therefore, how much people feel like they can settle in and contribute to their full capacity in the Canadian society.
You're on the front lines of this. Is there anything specific you would attribute any sort of shift in attitude toward? Is there a source of this changing attitude?
Well, certainly we look at the politicization of issues, and we're very conscious around the world that many politicians see that attacking refugees is an easy way to plug into the xenophobia that exists, the Me Too attitudes that exist in all of us and our worst selves. Luckily, in Canada, over the past decades, we've been relatively spared that elections tend not to be fought on who can be nastier towards refugees, as unfortunately is the case in many other countries. But this time, there's a real concern that some politicians may be wanting us to go in that direction. And in fact, we've written a joint open letter to all the leaders of all the political parties, asking them to be cautious and mindful in the way that they speak during the election campaign, because things could very easily go off the rails.
During the 2015 election campaign, the issue of Syrian refugees did come up, and it did play out. I remember covering it. It happened at the time of the photo of Alan Kurdi, the young Syrian boy who had died and washed up on the shore. And it certainly gave, if the world wasn't paying attention in the way it should have been, it certainly brought all of the attention to Syria and became an election campaign issue. Do you think that, given sort of the responses we're seeing here, that this is going to become an election issue in the 2019 campaign?
Well, it would be very disturbing if it became an election at the other end. Obviously, in the previous election, the party that won was the party that proposed a very generous and open response to the Syrian refugees in an urgent sort of way, which was appropriate to the moment. If we go the opposite direction 4 years later, that will not be to the credit of Canada. We would hope that we Canadians will be more paying attention to the choice that lies before us and comparing ourselves with what is happening in the United States. Of course, everybody is horrified by the photos and the stories from what is happening in the States. So we have a choice before us: is what kind of a country do we want to be? Do we want to be a country that is open and welcoming and respects the basic rights of those who knock on our door?
And you mentioned in that answer, you spoke about the generous policy that Canada adopted when it came to the Syrian refugees, 40,000 coming to Canada starting back in 2015. I know when the Syrian refugees did come to Canada, there was concern that there weren't enough resources, there wasn't enough infrastructure in place to really give the appropriate supports to those people. And the United Nations said that Canada took in more refugees than any other country, about 28,000 refugees last year, I believe it was. So does Canada have the support and the infrastructure to handle more refugees?
Well, I think we just need to a little bit nuance that response, because Canada did not take the majority of refugees, or more than any other country. It was only we resettled more.
Settled.
Many
countries
you're right. On a daily basis receive more than Canada receives in a year. And we only resettled more than any other country because the United States has drastically dropped the numbers that they resettled. So we would prefer to see Canada take that role as the leading resettlement country, because we've resettled more rather than that the U.S. has declined. Certainly Canada can and should do more to make sure that newcomers are properly supported, but at the same time it's important to recognize how much refugees in particular, and newcomers more generally, are resilient and really contribute to themselves to their integration. So I don't think we should look at it as more just like people are asking for more money or more services. That's part of it, but it's also a question of doing things more smartly so that refugees and other newcomers can contribute, and we take down the obstacles that prevent them from contributing to their full potential as soon as possible.
Janet Dench, I want to thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
That's Janet Dench of the Canadian Council for Refugees.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.